And Indian jails, it seems, have turned into a prison for people who are merely accused. I mean,
Yes.
it's so unfortunate that political prisoners, where their bail matter comes up before the court, if they get bail from the High Court, it gets stayed by the Supreme Court. And it carries on for months, and years are passing now. Despite the fact people are still able to maintain their sanity and to persevere and carry on and struggle. It takes a lot of doing, but they do it. The two situations are different: house arrest and the jail. Uh, Jail, you're confined either to a barrack for 16 hours, and it's only 8 hours in two parts that you allowed to come out. But that's true for barracks also. In the barracks, again, you have 7.5 hours of actually 5 hours, 7 hours of free time. Free meaning in relative terms again, where your barrack doors are unlocked and you are allowed to come out, and you can have a conversation with people who are in other barracks as well as. So you have that relative freedom, but you're not allowed outside. You can't step outside the wall. So is the case. So your mobility is affected. That's the single biggest thing that happens in a jail, whether in a barrack or in a cell. That constriction of the movement creates its own problems, obviously. It takes time before your body even acclimatizes to that. It takes some time. And unfortunately, my period of arrest coincided with pandemic, so there were long periods of quarantine that I particularly I underwent because of my peculiar circumstance. The case was registered in Pune, whereas I belong to Delhi. Because of pandemic, I had stayed back in Delhi, etc., etc. So I went through a different set of experience. And I also stayed in a special quarantine hospital created during pandemic to deal with the large numbers of arrests that were taking place right in the middle, in the midst of pandemic. And they were being brought to the jails, and the jails were getting overcrowded. In order to deal with that overflow, they decided to set up special quarantine centers. I was in one of them, not within Taloja, separate from Taloja. They had rented a school, one part of one corridor of the school, one side of one part of the school downstairs, and converted into the school rooms were converted into our barracks. And imagine, I mean, the school was meant for kids, children, right? So the benches, chairs, everything were meant and built for them. All these benches and chairs were removed, of course, and the open space is where we had to sleep on the floor. But the bathrooms were also built for kids, to cater to kids. Same toilets. I mean, it's a school building, so 3 toilets, latrines, and 7 urinals may have sufficed for kids during school hours. But for us who were placed under quarantine, that same space was too little to cater to need for anywhere between 350 to 700 people. You can imagine. And there was no bathing space, just a single bathing spot where you wash your clothes, washed yourself if you had an opportunity, and provided there was water available. Because there was a severe shortage of water. So it obviously it reduces the immunity level of everyone around. Doctors used to visit infrequently because they were catering also to the large prison population. So they had to time off to come and check us out. And these were Ayurvedic or homeopathic, which is all right. I mean, that's all right. It doesn't mean that their clinical reading is any poor. No, but they were not qualified to handle such large numbers in any case. And this was pandemic, so a qualified doctor was required. Blood tests were required. Constant monitoring of each and every inmate was required. That was not happening. I was lucky because I managed to come out within 4 weeks. Because I was able to inform my lawyers and Seba, my life partner, when I was allowed a phone call. And that got splashed, and they decided to remove me before the matter gained currency, so to say. So they decided to shift me. People who were left behind, who were with me, some of them spent more than 3 months in that hellhole before they were shifted to Taloja. Not that the conditions in Taloja were any better, they were marginally better. But by the time I was moved, barracks were overflowing with inmates. Barracks which are meant for 27, 29 had anywhere close to 60, sometimes even 70 in some barracks. And these inmates were sharing 4 toilets and an open space where you could bathe, wash your clothes, clean your utensils. You can imagine, and if there was a severe shortage of water, which happened frequently, there were days when we only got 1 bucket or 1.5 bucket of water for our water to drink, water to wash clothes, water to bathe, and water to clean the utensils. You can imagine. Jail rules provide for, if my memory serves me right, 136 liters of water per person. We were getting probably 15 to 18 liters of water. You can imagine that obviously all this meant that people were hurting physically and mentally, because unfortunately jails are centers for punishment, and inmates are supposed to suffer no matter what the jail rule book says or Supreme Court and High Court orders, any hundreds of them. In reality, it's meant to punish people and meant for people to suffer and to experience suffering. So there is no difference between an undertrial and a convict. Before being convicted, without even being tried, they are deemed at par with a convict. You can imagine how much more pain it causes to inmates because of this. And it's not easy for people to avail of legal help. Not everybody has. My colleagues have talked about it and have written about it. The ultimate truth is, and they've shared, and other political prisoners and other inmates have also highlighted this, that there is an appalling lack of legal assistance, and legal aid committees try as hard as they can, and some of them do try. There is no doubt about it. But it's inadequate, it's not enough. The other reality of jail is, which causes suffering and pain, is that for every relief that you require, from the most smallest to a more serious issue, from the trivial to the serious, the constant refrain is get a court order. And now the reality is that a lawyer would much rather spend time on the trial and preparing for the trial, because that's the main job. If they are dragged into also handle these cases, and the courts are supposed to handle, because the jail authorities have transferred the burden to the courts. The courts cannot handle. It's just not possible. If I have to go for my straw to a court, or for a book, or for a visit to the hospital, or for some special treatment or food, it's just impossible for the courts to deal with it, because the jail authorities have shirked their responsibilities and transferred the burden, and the courts have happily taken it without ensuring and cracking down on the jail authorities to say that it's your responsibility to cater to the needs of the inmates. They are in your custody. The courts don't do that. Even when the Bombay High Court found that the jail authorities had lied when this matter, a PIL, was filed by an inmate, pointing out that there was severe shortage of water and they were not getting more than a bucket or bucket and a half of water. The High Court set up a committee, led by a judge. He investigated the matter, found that all the complaints that the inmates listed were bona fide, and the jail authorities had lied. The High Court passed a good order, not that it restored water supply. Water remains in short supply in jails, but they refused to even reprimand the jail authorities. Given all these conditions, obviously you can imagine that mental health of the inmates suffers. And then, of course, there are others who suffer even more. I mean, it's so unfortunate that political prisoners, where their bail matter comes up before the court, if they get bail from the High Court, it gets stayed by the Supreme Court. And it carries on for months and months, and years are passing now. We are close to 2 years in one matter. My own number card, fellow co-accused, Mahesh Rao, despite the fact people are still able to maintain their sanity and to persevere and carry on and struggle. It takes a lot of doing, but they do it without much assistance. In fact, no assistance and no help from the authorities whose custodial responsibility all the prison inmates are. I mean, that's what shocks me. The custodial responsibility, I mean, authorities have absolved themselves of the custodial responsibility, it seems. On the one hand, the jail authorities, on the other hand, the judicial authority. The jail, because it shirks its responsibility, and the judicial probably also because it's overburdened and can't handle. But the suffering of the inmate gets compounded. So obviously, the mental health, and there is hardly any provision for counseling. In fact, what I observed during my jail life was, barring one jailer in the entire jail, when the inmates were brought to a circle or a ward, my jailer was the only jailer who gave time and talked and had long conversations with each inmate who came. No other jailer did. Counseling is something which is, I think, very much needed in jail. All kind of counseling. It's not just your mental and health issues. You have emotional issues. You have legal hassles that you're dealing with. You don't know what legal help redressal is available to you, where to look for it, somebody to guide, and it's jailer's responsibility. Suddenly a team would come and we would people would get to know that those who have problem mental health issues should come. Now, given that there is also socially it's the mental health thing is stigmatized,
Of course.
it still is a battle that has to be won. I mean, people have to recognize that mental health is as important as physical health, and that also requires treatment, diagnosis and treatment. So this still has to become universally acceptable or recognized. So not as if it's people in position of power and decision making or policy making are unaware of it.
Right.
It's also it's an area that needs absolutely looking into. This is not to say that one accepts jail for what it is. I mean, I also find jail an abomination. And Indian jails, it seems, have turned into a prison for people who are merely accused. I mean, if 77% of the jail population comprises undertrials, then what does it say? That the jails have become a center where you keep undertrials, accused, who have neither been tried nor convicted, for as long as you want, you can. And this is especially true for political prisoners. That if authorities are refer every request and demand that we bring a court order, then even for a psychiatric evaluation, now who can afford it in the first place? Secondly, who can get it? Somebody has to examine. The jail authority, jail medical staff has to examine and say that yes, this person needs to be evaluated by a psychiatrist. Inmates can't do it. We can refer the matter, we can bring it up again and again, and this invariably happens. They are so indifferent. That's why I said there is a certain degree of, there is a stigma attached to it. And it's because people from, obviously you're talking about Dalits, Bahujans, the Muslims, the poor tribals. These are the people. Those who are better off who come from well off or who are well connected, even in jail, they have access. They can manage things. They have a retinue of lawyers and other staff members, etc., or the family to look out for them outside and ensure that they get they get what they require and need. Other things, and since they come from such social background, obviously there is also an indifference and an apathy which is built into it. So obviously it's taken very lightly or it's joked about. It becomes a butt, those people also at times become a butt of joke. Sometimes, in fact, inmates can also can be very cruel at times until, until somebody intervenes and brings it to a stop. But we have cases where people are then locked up in hospital who are very serious cases. They are locked up, and they are in complete isolation. Till I didn't see even once any psychiatrist coming to look at some of the inmates who had been locked up in the jail hospital because they were supposed to be pagal within quotes. My isolation was worse because of the long period of quarantine and isolation. Nearly 3 months I spent in total in quarantine and isolation. And that was tough because you're all by yourself, not in quarantine where we were packed like sardines in the Gokhale school where we were placed, which was converted into a special quarantine center. But once you were brought to the jail, I was placed in quarantine after having spent 4 weeks in quarantine in that special center. I was placed for 2 weeks in isolation in the jail hospital, where I could not come out. I was locked 24 hours. The only time I came out was when because I hadn't got a haircut or a beard trim, and because of what had happened, that was one time they brought me out from my cell so that the barber could cut my hair and things like that. And the other time when I needed to make a phone call when I was allowed. Those were the only moments I remember. Otherwise, I was locked up. The good and the bad about house arrest was that while I had company of my life partner, Seba, and I was able, my diet improved by leaps and bounds in contrast to the jail food that I was partaking. But I was lonelier under house arrest, and it was tougher to cope with it because you're all by yourself most of the time. I mean, Seba was with me, but there were occasions when she had to travel to Delhi.
Right.
And those were periods that were toughest for me to handle because I had no one to talk to.
Right.
In any case, those 20 months, yeah, that was tough. Both, I mean, mentally and emotionally, that was tough. Taloja was very special. It's a modern jail, built in early 2007, I think, it was completed. So it's a modern jail. So in contrast to other jails, as I understand, even my experience from Tihar, what stood apart as far as Taloja was concerned was beautiful surrounding with a hill flanking the jail and greenery all around and all that, but that was outside from a distance. Inside, these were like cement blocks where you didn't have windows. You had open grilled front with a door which was locked and would be unlocked when Bandi opened and locked when Bandi closed. So there's not a blade of grass or greenery anywhere inside. From the cell, you could not see any greenery. I was lucky that I was placed in the circle in a barrack on the first floor. And it was called the police barrack because there were a lot of police personnel a variety of offences. They were placed in that barrack.
Okay.
So I was placed amongst them.
Mm.
Given my DK16 connection, uh, they thought it wiser to place me amongst them. Anyway, the good part about it is from my window, the grill window, I could see the hill and the greenery and the sky. Otherwise, you didn't see the sky or barely. Uh, Hardly got any sun. You long for sun, fresh air, and greenery. I mean, your eyes used to thirst for greenery, something uh, just to see trees and flowers and plants and grass. It wasn't. It's only when we were brought out of the ward that we saw that open expanse of green field, plants, trees, birds. So on every occasion that you could, or you could maneuver, you try to get out of the ward in order to at least breathe in some fresh air, walk more freely, and enjoy the sun and the breeze. The purpose of the jail affection is very clear and make there is there should be no confusion about it. It is to impose such conditions on the inmate quite deliberately and purposefully.
Mm.
There's nothing, no other explanation that could explain why, despite in 21st century, we should still be talking about horrible jail conditions across the country and the plight of the inmates. Some more than others, no doubt, but they share the same miserable condition across the board. Oh, camaraderie, and the solidarity. Not just, I was fortunate, we are part of PK16, so our numbers itself. Then the fellow other political prisoners over there, and if, all the inmates in general. Because as far as the inmate was concerned, political prisoners was slightly different, right? Because we were not there for self-gratification. We were not, there was no offense where we could be accused of self-gratification. So there was a difference.
Right.
No, so the camaraderie with them, with the jail inmates, that helped enormously, and my fellow co-accused, obviously, there's no doubt about it. For each one of us, I mean, we have been for all of us. It's a great bonding that also got forged. I'm thankful for that. Very, despite what the case and the experience and everything, discovered friends and bondings for life, I think. That is something that sustained us. And obviously, when you spend a long time there, even the jail staff who interact with you on an everyday basis, they get to know you. The officers are different.
Right.
Most of them remained officials, and many of them were also offensive and bullish. There were some who also got to know the inmates, many of us, and it does help. So over time, when you get to know people and they get to know you, the equation changes. That does happen, and that sustains you. You know, human adaptability as well as human uh, the compassion and empathy that people show to each other in difficult circumstances. That is what sustains. It's not the quality of food. It's not the quality of medical or health provision or the living space and the living conditions. None of this. Those remain miserable.